Have you ever found yourself standing at the edge of despair, wondering if there was still a place in this world where you truly belonged? Imagine being a young woman who has lost her family, her future, and every certainty she once held. Alone on the frontier, Eleanor Hayes stumbles into a land that is both unforgiving and full of promise. At Silver Creek Ranch, she meets Daniel Mercer, a man who built his life with his own hands, but carries the quiet weight of loneliness. But what happens when survival turns into choice? When gratitude begins to feel like love? Would you dare to stay, risking your heart, or walk away in fear of gossip and judgment? This is not just a story of two people. It's a mirror to our own questions about love, resilience, and the courage to start again. If you were in Eleanor's shoes, would you cling to the safety of the past or step boldly into an uncertain future? Stay with us and let this journey stir your own memories and dreams. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the heart of this story. The haze of the Oregon Trail clung to the twilight, turning the last light of day into a blur as Eleanor Hayes pushed forward. Her boots were split open at the seams, her palms torn and raw from days of stumbling across rocky ground. It was the summer of 1868, and the bright promise of a new life in the West had turned into bitter ruin after her family's wagon train was attacked 3 nights earlier. She was the only one left. She had fled into the wild with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small locket carrying her parents' likeness. Hunger twisted inside her as she climbed a low ridge, her vision dimming with every step. At the crest, she spotted the outline of a homestead against the darkening horizon. For a moment she thought it a cruel trick of her weary mind a barn, a corral, the glow of lantern lights spilling from a cabin window. Driven by desperation, Eleanor forced herself forward. Near the corral, a tall man stepped out of the barn, guiding a chestnut mare to the trough. She tried to call for help, but her voice was only a broken rasp. Summoning her last strength, she staggered closer before her knees buckled and she collapsed in the dirt just beyond the fence line. The thud of approaching boots was the last sound she registered. "Miss, can you hear me?" A deep voice broke through the fog. Strong hands lifted her gently, turning her so that she looked up into a sun-browned face framed by sandy hair, blue eyes sharp with concern. "Water," she whispered, without a word. He scooped her up as though she weighed nothing and carried her inside the cabin. "Hold on. You're safe now," he promised. But Eleanor slipped into darkness. When she woke again, she was lying in a narrow bed beneath a quilt, the air scented with wood smoke and lamp oil. A cool cloth rested against her brow. She tried to sit, but a steady hand pressed her gently back. "Easy," the same voice said. "You're safe, but you need rest." In the lantern's glow, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had thought at first glance, perhaps 30, with a square jaw dusted by a short beard. "Where am I?" she croaked. "You're at Silver Creek Ranch, about 40 miles southwest of Fort Bridger. Name's Daniel Mercer. I found you at the edge of my land." He held a cup to her lips and she drank greedily, the cool water easing her throat. "I'm Eleanor Hayes," she managed. "Our wagon train was ambushed 3 days ago. I ran. I don't know if anyone else lived." A shadow crossed Daniel's features. "I'm sorry. These territories can be cruel, especially to folks new to them." "They killed my father," she whispered. "My mother passed from fever before that." His expression softened with quiet sympathy. "You'll be safe here for now. Rest tonight. We'll sort things out in the morning." As he stood to leave, Eleanor caught his sleeve weakly. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer, I have nothing to give for your kindness, but maybe I could work, earn my keep. I'm strong. I learn quickly." A faint smile touched his lips. "We'll talk on it tomorrow. For now, sleep." When morning came, sunlight spilled through muslin curtains. Eleanor's body still ached, but the terrible weakness had lifted. On a chair beside the bed lay a neatly mended dress and underthings. She dressed slowly, then made her way into the main room. The cabin was modest but clean, its stone hearth warming the space. At the stove, Daniel stood broad-shouldered, turning food in a skillet. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," Eleanor said softly, so as not to startle him. He glanced back with a nod. "Glad to see you up. Hungry, famished? Let me help." "Already done," he said, sliding bacon and eggs onto 2 plates. "Coffee's ready." They ate in silence until Eleanor set her fork down. "Mr. Mercer, I can't thank you enough for helping me. As I said last night, I'd like to work to repay you. I can cook, sew, clean whatever's needed." Daniel studied her, shaking his head. "No, you've been through too much. You need to rest." "I don't want charity," she said firmly, her pride bracing her words. He leaned back, thoughtful. "It isn't charity to help someone in need, but if it will ease your mind, I could use an extra hand. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, only comes by twice a week. There's always more work than I can manage alone." Relief washed over Eleanor's face. "Thank you. I won't be a burden." "We'll start slow," Daniel cautioned. "You're still healing." And true to his word, he spent the next days showing her around the ranch the small herd of cattle grazing the open hills, the 6 horses in the barn, the chicken coop out back, and the vegetable patch he had planted himself. Over the next few days, Eleanor Hayes discovered more about the man who had taken her in. Daniel Mercer had carved Silver Creek Ranch out of the wild plains with his own hands. Just 5 years earlier, he had stood on this very patch of land with nothing but a small savings, from guiding wagon trains westward and a vision of what might be. Now the place carried his mark everywhere she looked: the sturdy barn, the well-fenced pastures, the cattle grazing beyond the hills, and the tidy cabin where she had found shelter. Daniel did not live entirely alone. 2 ranch hands, Javier and Samuel, usually worked alongside him, but they were away driving a small herd of cattle to a buyer in a neighboring settlement. Until they returned, Daniel carried the weight of the place himself. Eleanor could see the toll in the lines on his face, though he rarely complained. By her 4th morning at Silver Creek, she insisted on doing more than simply resting in the cabin. As Daniel set breakfast on the table, he studied her critically. "You've gained a bit of color back, but you're still too thin," he remarked, sliding a plate of eggs toward her. "Another few days of rest wouldn't hurt." Eleanor straightened in her chair, her chin lifting with determination. "Mr. Mercer, I've been idle long enough. Cooking breakfast is hardly a burden. I would rather feel useful than sit and waste away." A reluctant grin tugged at his mouth. "You are a stubborn woman." "Miss Hayes? So my father often said," she replied, her voice softening with memory. She quickly shifted, unwilling to linger on grief. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I noticed your shirts need mending." He gave a quiet chuckle, but did not argue further. From that day on, Eleanor began to take her place in the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before sunrise to prepare coffee and biscuits before Daniel returned from his early rounds. During the day, she cleaned the small cabin, laundered clothes in the creek, and kept the firewood stacked high. In the evenings, she would settle by the hearth with her sewing. while Daniel read aloud from one of the worn books he had collected. The routine was simple, but to Eleanor, it carried a surprising comfort she had not known since leaving Boston. 2 weeks after her arrival, Daniel returned from a supply run to Clearwater with a letter in hand. He handed it to Eleanor with quiet gravity. "It came from your aunt," he said. "I explained your circumstances in the note I sent." Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was short but decisive. Her aunt urged her to return east, warning that the frontier was no place for a young woman alone. Eleanor folded the paper slowly, her throat tightening. "She wants me to come back to Boston," she whispered. "She says I'll find nothing but hardship here." Daniel's expression remained unreadable, but his fingers tightened around his coffee cup. "She may be right," he admitted. "Life out here is hard, especially for a woman without family." "Is that what you think I should do?" she asked, her eyes searching his. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke evenly. "I think you should do what will give you peace and safety. Miss Hayes, only you can know what that is." That night, Eleanor lay awake, the weight of choice pressing heavily upon her. Boston meant familiarity, society, perhaps even marriage one day. But as she thought of returning to parlors and expectations, something deep inside resisted. She had endured too much to simply slip back into the role the East demanded of her. The next morning, she found Daniel brushing down his black stallion in the barn. The air was cool, filled with the scent of hay and horses. She stepped closer, her voice firm. "I've decided not to go back east." He stilled, hand resting on the animal's neck, before turning to face her. "May I ask why I found something here I never had in Boston?" she said quietly. "A sense of purpose, work that matters, the chance to build something with my own hands." He returned to brushing, his movement steady. "The West is dangerous, Eleanor, especially for a woman on her own." "I know," she interrupted, "but I am not asking to stay here forever. I only need time to find my place, perhaps in Clearwater. For now, though, this feels right." "You're welcome as long as you need," he replied, though his voice held something beneath the casual tone. "Besides, I've grown used to your cooking." Her heart gave a small leap at the words, though she said nothing. Spring soon melted into summer. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Eleanor expanded the garden and filled the pantry with jars she carefully organized. She even convinced Daniel to add a small flock of geese, much to his quiet amusement. When Javier and Samuel returned from their drive, they found her so firmly woven into the household that her presence seemed natural. One warm evening, as they sat on the porch watching the mountains glow purple and gold in the setting sun, Daniel spoke. "I'm riding into Clearwater tomorrow. Would you like to join me?" Eleanor's face lit up with surprise. "I would very much." The next morning, Daniel saddled his stallion, Thunder, while Eleanor mounted a gentle mare he had lent her named Daisy. The ride stretched across open plains, the sound of hooves steady against the earth. For Eleanor, the town was a welcome sight after weeks of isolation. Clearwater was little more than a single street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of shops. "It isn't much," Daniel remarked as they tied the horses outside the store, "but it gets the job done." "I think it's charming," Eleanor said honestly. After solitude on the ranch, even the modest bustle of Clearwater felt alive. Inside, the shopkeeper greeted Daniel warmly. "Mr. Mercer, good to see you again. And who might this young lady be?" "This is Miss Eleanor Hayes," Daniel introduced. "She's staying at my ranch for a time." The shopkeeper's brows rose slightly, but his smile stayed friendly. "Any friend of Mr. Mercer's is welcome here. Miss Hayes." As they gathered supplies, Eleanor became aware of curious glances from the townsfolk. When Daniel stepped aside to discuss an order of feed, a well-dressed woman approached. "I'm Martha Collins," she said kindly. "My husband is the town doctor. We rarely see new faces in Clearwater. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Collins," Eleanor replied politely. "May I ask how long you've been with Mr. Mercer?" The question was casual, but Eleanor detected the weight behind it. "Nearly 2 months," she answered truthfully. "He took me in after I lost my family on the trail." Martha's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Daniel is a good man. But, dear, people do talk." Heat rose to Eleanor's cheeks. "I assure you, everything is proper. I work as Mr. Mercer's housekeeper." "Of course," Martha said, patting her arm. "No one who knows Daniel would think otherwise. I only meant to warn you about gossip. The frontier can be cruel in that way, too." The words lingered with Eleanor as they rode back across the hills toward Silver Creek. She was quieter than usual, her thoughts turning uneasily. Finally, Daniel glanced at her. "Something troubling you?" he asked. She hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Mrs. Collins suggested that my staying at the ranch might be stirring talk." His jaw tightened, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I should have thought of that. People out here thrive on each other's business. Perhaps I should look for work in town," Eleanor said, though the thought of leaving the ranch and Daniel filled her with unexpected ache. "Is that what you want?" His voice was measured. "No," she admitted softly, "but I would not wish to harm your reputation." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "My reputation can handle a little gossip. Yours, however—" He trailed off, frowning. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked. He was silent a long moment, then said, "We could ask Mrs. Abernathy to move in full-time. She's been wanting to leave town since her son went east, as a chaperone. Her presence would quiet the talk." Relief flooded Eleanor. "That sounds like a wise idea." The following week, Mrs. Abernathy moved into the small guest room. Her sharp wit and frontier know-how added warmth to the household. In the evenings, she spun tales of hardship and triumph by the fire, and Eleanor found herself both comforted and strengthened by the older woman's presence. With a chaperone in place, the whispers in Clearwater lost their sting. Eleanor resumed her duties with renewed spirit, riding Daisy under Daniel's watchful guidance, learning to handle the animals, and managing the household with growing confidence. Yet beneath the surface, something new and unspoken lingered between her and Daniel, something neither dared name, though both felt it growing stronger with each passing day. The woman in the fine dress introduced herself with a warm smile. "I am Martha Collins. My husband is the town doctor. We do not often see new faces in Clearwater." Eleanor Hayes inclined her head politely. "It is a pleasure, Mrs. Collins." The woman studied her closely before asking, "May I ask how long you have been staying with Mr. Mercer?" Her tone was gentle, but Eleanor caught the weight behind the question. "Nearly 2 months," Eleanor answered honestly. "Mr. Mercer offered me a home after I lost my family on the trail." Martha's eyes softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, dear. You have endured much." She hesitated before lowering her voice. "It is good of Daniel to help you, but people notice such things. A young woman living under the same roof as a bachelor, even a man as respected as Mr. Mercer can give rise to talk. Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks. I assure you, Mrs. Collins, everything is entirely proper. I work as Mr. Mercer's housekeeper. Of course, Martha replied quickly, patting Eleanor's arm. No one who truly knows Daniel would think otherwise. He is an honorable man, one of the best in these parts. I simply thought you should be aware how tongues wag. The words lingered in Eleanor's mind long after they left the store. On the ride back to Silver Creek Ranch, she sat quietly atop Daisy, her thoughts circling. Daniel noticed her silence. As they crested a hill and the ranch spread out below them, he asked, "Something troubling you?" She hesitated, then answered truthfully, "Mrs. Collins suggested that my living at the ranch might be giving rise to gossip." His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing against the horizon. "I should have considered that. People out here find amusement in each other's business. Perhaps I should look for a position in town," Eleanor said softly, though the idea of leaving filled her with unexpected pain. "Is that what you want?" Daniel asked, his tone carefully measured. "No," she admitted, "but I would not want to damage your reputation." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "My reputation can bear the weight of a few whispers. It is yours that concerns me." "Then what would you suggest?" she asked. For a long moment he said nothing. Finally, he replied, "We could ask Mrs. Abernathy to stay with us full time. She has been looking to move out of town since her son left for the East. With her as a chaperone, no one could question propriety." Relief washed through Eleanor. That seems a sensible solution. The following week, Mrs. Abernathy moved into the small guest room. The older woman brought with her years of frontier wisdom, along with a sharp wit and a collection of stories she told by the fire at night. Eleanor quickly grew fond of her practical advice and steady presence. Summer deepened. Life at Silver Creek settled into a rhythm that suited Eleanor. She discovered a knack for horsemanship, something she had never attempted back in Boston. Daniel began teaching her how to ride properly, abandoning the stiff side saddle she had been trained on in the East. "You need to be part of the horse," he explained one morning, adjusting her posture as she sat astride Daisy. "Feel her movements. Anticipate them before they happen." His hand steadied her waist as he guided her, and a flutter rose in Eleanor's chest that had nothing to do with fear of falling. She became more and more aware of him, not just as the man who had rescued her, but as someone she admired deeply. His strength, his quiet intelligence, the rare smile that transformed his face, all of it unsettled her. She had come west expecting to help her family build a new life. That dream had been torn apart. Now she found herself building a different kind of life, one she had never imagined, with a man whose presence stirred feelings she did not fully understand. At times she caught herself watching him from the kitchen window as he moved across the yard, tall and sure, every motion efficient. She reminded herself sternly that he was her employer, nothing more. Yet her heart quickened whenever he entered a room, and she could not deny it. One late July afternoon, the skies darkened as they rode back from the far pasture. The wind carried the sharp scent of rain, and thunder cracked in the distance. "We will not make it back in time," Daniel called over the rising storm. "There is an old line shack beyond that ridge. We will wait it out there." The rain broke in heavy sheets before they reached the structure. By the time they dismounted, both were soaked through. Lightning split the sky as Daniel pushed open the shack's door. Inside, the shelter was small but sturdy, with an iron stove in the corner and a narrow cot along one wall. Daniel set to work quickly. coaxing a fire into life while Eleanor wrung water from her skirts. The thin cotton clung to her frame, and she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. Daniel glanced at her, then turned abruptly away, shrugging out of his long coat. Without meeting her eyes, he held it out. "Here. You are freezing." Eleanor slipped it on, the weight of it enveloping her, carrying the scent of leather and pine that she associated with him. "Thank you," she murmured, moving closer to the stove. The storm raged outside, the rain drumming against the roof. Inside, the fire warmed the cramped space. They spoke quietly to fill the silence. Daniel told her of his boyhood in Missouri, of his father's death in a mining accident, and of his decision to seek a future in the West, with nothing but determination to guide him. "And you," he asked at last, "what brought your family to the frontier?" Eleanor gazed into the flames. "My father was a teacher in Boston. He dreamed of opening a school in the territories, bringing education to children who had none. My mother was less certain, but she loved him too much to let him go alone." She smiled faintly, then sighed. "He was a good man, though sometimes impractical." Daniel's eyes softened. "And you? Did you share his dream?" "Yes," she admitted. "But I also longed for a chance to begin again, away from the expectations of Boston society. Out here, I thought I could define myself differently." "Have you?" he asked. "I am trying," she said quietly. Their eyes met across the dim light of the fire. For a moment, the air between them thickened with something unspoken, a tension neither dared name. Daniel stood abruptly, moving to the window to peer at the rain. "It is letting up," he said briskly. "We should ride back before dark." The journey home was silent, each lost in thought. When they reached Silver Creek, Mrs. Abernathy was waiting anxiously on the porch. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed. "I was about to send Javier after you. Only a storm, nothing more," Daniel assured her as he helped Eleanor down from Daisy. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he stepped back. That night, Eleanor lay awake long after the household had gone quiet. She could not shake the memory of the line shack, the warmth of Daniel's coat around her shoulders, the way his eyes had looked into hers before he turned away. Something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable, and it both frightened and thrilled her. Daniel Mercer handed Eleanor his long coat without turning his eyes on her. "Here, you're trembling." She accepted it with quiet gratitude, pulling it close around her shoulders. The weight of the coat carried his scent, leather and pine, the smell of the land itself, of the man who had become her anchor in this strange and often unforgiving country. "Thank you," she whispered, inching nearer to the warmth of the stove. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked. "Hard to tell," he replied, running a hand through his wet hair, leaving it sticking up in untamed spikes. "Sometimes they roll through in an hour. Sometimes they set in for the night. Mrs. Abernathy will worry if we are not back before dark." The mention of the older woman restored a thin veil of propriety, as though her presence at the ranch extended even here, setting a boundary between them that neither dared cross. As the rain battered the roof, they spoke to fill the silence. Daniel shared pieces of his past, his boyhood in Missouri, the loss of his father in a mining accident, and his decision to strike west, with little more than grit and hope. His voice carried no self-pity, only the matter-of-fact steadiness of a man who had learned to survive by moving forward. When he asked about her own story, Eleanor hesitated. Then she told him about Boston, about her father's dream of bringing education to the frontier. "He was a teacher," she said, her voice thick with memory. He wanted to start a school out here, to give children a chance at more than hard labor. My mother worried, but she followed him anyway. She smiled faintly. He was idealistic, sometimes impractical, but he was good. Daniel studied her quietly. And did you share his dream? I believed in it. Yes, but more than that. I wanted a new beginning. In Boston, society already had my life planned for me. Out here, I thought perhaps I could shape it myself. He looked at her then, his eyes warm and searching. And have you? I'm trying, she murmured, every day. The air thickened with unspoken thoughts until Daniel rose abruptly and moved to the window. The rain is letting up. We should ride before the light fades. The trip back to Silver Creek was wordless, each lost in thought. When they reached the ranch, they found Mrs. Abernathy waiting on the porch, her hands clasped in relief. Thank heavens, she called as they dismounted. I nearly sent Javier after you. Just a storm, Daniel assured her. He helped Eleanor down, his hand steady at her waist. They lingered there an instant too long before he pulled away. That night Eleanor lay awake, turning over the day's events in her mind. Something had shifted in the line shack, something neither of them could deny. The recognition unsettled her, yet it carried a quiet thrill that kept her from sleep. The following weeks were marked by a subtle tension between them. They moved carefully, keeping polite distance, yet their awareness of each other was constant. Eleanor found excuses to bring him coffee in the barn or to ask his opinion about supper. Daniel, for his part, often lingered near her in the evenings, reading by the fire while she worked her needle, though his eyes drifted toward her more than toward the page. Mrs. Abernathy observed it all with shrewd silence, never commenting, though the knowing look in her eyes suggested she understood far more than either would admit. August arrived, bringing with it the season of cattle drives. Daniel began preparations to take a small herd to Dodge City, where buyers would be waiting, the night before his departure. Eleanor found him on the porch, gazing up at the clear summer sky. The stars stretched wide and endless, and for a long moment neither spoke. "It is a beautiful night," he said at last, his voice quiet. "Yes," she agreed. "Will you be gone long? 2 weeks?" "Perhaps 3," he replied. After a pause, he turned toward her. "Will you still be here when I return?" The question startled her. Where else would I be? His expression was unreadable in the dim light. "You have been here nearly 4 months now. I thought perhaps you might have plans to move on." Her heart pounded. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly, firmly. "That is not it. I just would not have you feel bound by obligation." Eleanor faced him fully, the words leaving her before she could stop them. "I do not stay out of obligation, Daniel." It was the first time she had spoken his given name, and the sound of it lingered in the warm night air. "Then why do you stay?" he asked softly. She could not give voice to the truth that this ranch, this man, had become her home in ways she never expected. Instead, she said simply, "Because I want to be here." He held her gaze for a long moment before nodding. "I am glad." Then he bid her good night. The days that followed stretched slowly in his absence. Eleanor threw herself into work to stave off the ache of missing him. She preserved vegetables from the garden, scrubbed the cabin from floor to rafters, even joined Javier and Samuel in some of the lighter ranch duties. Each night she sat by the fire with Mrs. Abernathy, mending clothes or shelling beans. Yet her thoughts wandered again and again to the man who had ridden west with his cattle. "You miss him, Mrs." Abernathy observed one evening, her sharp eyes never leaving her stitching. Eleanor's cheeks warmed. She did not deny it. "I suppose I do." "That is nothing to be ashamed of," the older woman said briskly. "Daniel is a good man. Hard to find better out here." Eleanor bent her head, hiding her expression. She had not intended to let her feelings show. But Mrs. Abernathy had seen the truth plainly. Perhaps she had known it even before Eleanor herself had. The ranch carried on, but the days seemed quieter without Daniel's presence, the nights longer. Eleanor found herself glancing toward the road, listening for the distant sound of hooves, her heart leaping at every echo. When at last the cattle drive ended and the riders returned, dust-covered and weary, Eleanor stood on the porch, her breath caught in her chest. The moment she saw Daniel dismount, tall and sure as ever, she knew that her world had shifted for good. "Mrs." Abernathy's words echoed in Eleanor's ears long after their conversation ended. The older woman's steady hands kept stitching, while her voice carried truths Eleanor had scarcely allowed herself to think. Daniel was a good man, Mrs. Abernathy had said, one who had spent too many years alone. A ranch, strong hands to help, livestock grazing on the hills, all of that could fill a day, but not a heart. It struck Eleanor that she too had been wandering through her grief until she crossed paths with Daniel. The thought left her restless, unable to sleep. When Daniel finally returned from Dodge City, Eleanor was bent over the tomato vines in the garden, pulling fruit heavy with summer sun. She shaded her eyes when the distant sound of horses drifted on the wind. Dust swirled as riders approached, and at their head was Daniel, his broad frame unmistakable even beneath the trail grime. Her heart lifted at the sight of him, and for the first time she fully understood how much she had missed his presence. He dismounted, weariness etched across his face, but the moment his eyes found hers, his expression softened into a smile that reached all the way into his steady blue gaze. The knot in her chest loosened. Whatever uncertainty had plagued her during his absence fell away. That evening, after Javier and Samuel had eaten their fill and washed off the trail dust, Daniel asked Eleanor if she might walk with him. She agreed, her pulse quickening as they strolled toward the small creek marking the eastern edge of Silver Creek Ranch. The land was painted in molten gold by the sinking sun, and the quiet between them seemed almost sacred. "The drive went well," Daniel said after a while. "We fetched a good price for the herd." "I'm glad," Eleanor replied, sensing there was something more he wished to say. He stopped near the water's edge, turning to face her. His expression carried a gravity she had not seen before. "Eleanor," he began, her name rolling off his tongue with a tenderness that caught her breath. "This land, this ranch, I built it from nothing. I have always taken pride in that, but these past weeks on the trail, I could not stop thinking of returning, not to the ranch, but to you." Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "I know this may sound sudden," he went on quickly, "though for me it does not feel sudden at all. Truth is, I have been falling in love with you since the day you opened your eyes under this roof and insisted you could work, though you were barely standing." A laugh bubbled from her lips, part joy, part disbelief. "I do not have riches or grand promises," Daniel continued, his voice firm but gentle. "All I have is this land, and my vow to spend every day trying to make you happy. If you could see your way to stay, not as my housekeeper, but as my wife, I would count myself the most fortunate man alive." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. "When I arrived here, I was broken and adrift. You gave me shelter, but more than that, you gave me a reason to keep going. Somewhere along the way, this place became home, and you became the person I want to share it with." Hope flared in his eyes. "Is that a yes, yes?" she whispered, and then with greater strength, "Yes." He pulled her close, and his lips found hers in a kiss that carried the weight of longing finally freed. When they drew apart, he pressed his forehead to hers, his voice hushed. "I love you, Eleanor Hayes, and I love you, Daniel Mercer," she answered, the truth of it filling her from head to toe. 2 weeks later, they stood side by side in the small church at Clearwater. Mrs. Abernathy, Javier, and Samuel were there, along with nearly the entire town. Dr. Collins and his wife Martha had spoken often of the rancher and the Eastern girl who had endured tragedy, only to find strength and love again. And the community came out in force to celebrate. The ceremony was simple, but the joy in the room was undeniable. Afterward, neighbors and townsfolk gathered at Silver Creek Ranch for a feast that lasted well into the night. Lanterns glowed from the porch, fiddles played, and laughter echoed across the fields. For Eleanor, it felt like stepping into a dream she had never dared to imagine. When the last guest departed and silence settled over the homestead, Daniel lifted her into his arms and carried her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Mercer," he said softly, setting her down in the main room, now adorned with wildflowers gathered by Mrs. Abernathy. Eleanor looked around at the walls that had sheltered her in her darkest hour, now shining with the promise of a future. "It feels right," she said, "as though this is exactly where I was meant to be, years past, bringing change and blessing to Silver Creek Ranch." The house grew larger to make room for their children. First a son named Matthew, then twin daughters Anna and Caroline. Daniel expanded the cattle operation, hiring more hands and improving the land. Eleanor found joy in both motherhood and her place beside her husband, her strength matched by his steadiness. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Daniel revealed a surprise he had kept hidden for months. He led her to a new wooden building on the edge of the property. Its walls were plain, its roof simple, but inside were rows of benches, a slate board, and a small shelf stacked with books. "For the children when they are older," he explained, "and for any others in these parts who need learning." Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she stepped inside. "My father's dream," she whispered. "And yours," Daniel reminded her, wrapping his arms around her. "I know how much you have missed teaching." She turned in his embrace, her heart overflowing. "How did I find such fortune? Not only safety, but happiness, I ask myself the same each day," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "The day you collapsed at the edge of my land, I only meant to help someone in need. I never imagined you would become the center of my world." Eleanor smiled, recalling her desperate words from so long ago. "I can work, sir," she had begged, and his gentle reply, "No, you can rest beside me, now." As she looked out the schoolhouse window toward the ranch, she saw their children playing in the yard under Mrs. Abernathy's watchful eye. The homestead pulsed with life and laughter, a place of safety and love. "We have built something beautiful," she said, "and we are only beginning," Daniel promised, pressing a kiss to her lips as the golden afternoon light streamed through the windows, brightening the path of the life they would continue to build together. The story of Eleanor and Daniel reminds us that life's greatest blessings often come when we least expect them. After loss and hardship, Eleanor believed she had nothing left to offer. Yet by opening her heart, she found purpose and belonging in a place far from where her life began. Daniel, too, had built his world on strength and solitude, never realizing that what he truly longed for was someone to share it with. For those of us who have lived many seasons, this tale carries a timeless truth. Dignity, kindness, and companionship are more valuable than wealth or status. Even after heartbreak, it is never too late to begin again. The West in their story may feel distant, but the choices are familiar, whether to close ourselves off or to reach out, to live only in survival or to allow joy a place at the table. At any age, we can choose to build something meaningful, to give of ourselves, and to receive the unexpected grace of love. It is in those choices that life becomes full again. Thank you for spending your time with us and letting this story touch your heart. If it inspired you, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need hope, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the power of love, dignity, and second chances.